you so much for being here on tax day. April 15th comes around. It's one of those dates kind of like Christmas, right? Every year, Christmas is on the 25th of December, and you better be ready for it because there's no delaying it. Well, that's the very same thing that's true for income tax day. So I hope that all of you got a huge refund and can think of a million different ways to spend it. I'm not that fortunate, but that's okay. I'm hoping that you are. So thank you so much. This is Doctors and Coaches Corner. I'm the doctor and Brett's the coach. And we call him Coach Little Z sometimes to his face and sometimes behind his back. But anyway, we're here today to talk with you about bullying. And I do want to just set the stage for you about this. In the 1990s, we became very involved with our after school program in the district that we were both in with AmeriCorps. And our AmeriCorps program was 100% about bullying and keeping bullying from happening. And you know, at that time, what we discovered is that there was very, very little going on around bullying in the United States. It was almost non-existent. The research that we looked for to be able to craft the program and what we wanted to do. So we went to Canada. Canada had a huge program around anti-bullying. Now, the United States has absolutely caught up with that. But our familiarity with this topic goes way back because we really learned a lot about bullying and ways to prevent it and how to look at it in such a way that you can really help move the needle if that's something that's happening in your program. So Brett, I don't know if you want to share because you were the director of that program with AmeriCorps, but it was really awesome what happened.
Yeah, so just a little bit of additional items there regarding the framework in particular. We call it the bully triangle. And so what everybody looks at is the bully, but what they do is and maybe they look at the victim, not so much even back in the day. Now they would for sure. But what they forget is the onlookers. And so what we figured out pretty quick on this national model, and I do believe that this became a national model because, as Gma said, nobody knew a lot about this. Mm-hmm. And so we had 30 members. Each member had somewhere between 5 and 10 kids on their caseload. And at first, it was primarily the victims that we worked with because we didn't know any better either, right? And so what we figured out pretty early on is that, wait a minute, it's not just about the bully or about the victim, it's these onlookers and their strength in numbers, so to speak. And so what happened was we hired these 30 people, and they became like the Jiminy Cricket, so to speak, where they would follow the kids around and they would, the Walt Disney Jiminy Cricket would kind of talk in their ears and say, hey, you need to stand up for yourself. You can be assertive without being angry. You don't need to run away. You don't need to fight either. There's something in the middle, right? And so they would really just kind of hands-on work with them on a regular basis. So just want to make sure that we understand that being bullied is about a triangle. It's not about the bully individually or the victim individually. And there are usually onlookers.
All right. Yes, that's so true. And so, Robert, let's get to the questions now that we've kind of laid that groundwork. I guess we're telling you we're credible in this topic because we've actually worked with it. And in the probably mid 90s to now. So we've been at this for several decades. So what's the first question?
Yes, the first question is, what are the key signs that a youth is being bullied?
So, every kid is different. And so there's not like one sign for sure. So one of the things that you can see is withdrawal, that they, instead of continuing to participate, you see the child not being so much ostracized as pulling themselves out. So they're just going to be avoiding. And, we're kind of hardwired to either fight, flight, or freeze. And so when kids withdraw, they're fleeing. They're getting out of the situation. Another thing that you can see is that a child who typically is not very aggressive becomes quite aggressive and more explosive, or they could be the opposite of explosive and be imploding, so that you could see them turning it in on themselves. So if you know your kids and you've built a relationship with them, and you talk with them regularly, you'll start to be able to pick up in their behavior and in their language that things aren't working for them. Things are changing, and you will see either this symptom of fight, flight, or freeze. And with freeze, they don't do anything at all. They just are frozen in place. So those would be things I would look for. Brett, I'm sure that you have others more in detail that you could offer.
Well, I think you have several, right? So the first one's visual, and that's kind of the easier one to see if the bruises on the arm, and that could be self-imposed from the bullying, or it could be the bully themselves. It's not always the bully; it could be self-imposed. Now, obviously, if they're covered up, right, then you're not going to be able to see that. But there's signs of that, right? You shouldn't be in Bakersfield. It gets up to 110 degrees in the summer. If they're wearing jackets to cover stuff up, that's going to be probably an issue. Not always, but probably. I know I stand like this with my arms closed a lot, or I have a scowl on my face. It's just because I'm an intense listener. It's not because I'm mad or upset. It's just this is comfortable for me or whatever. So whatever the signs are, let's not go overboard. And we kind of talked about that last week or the week before as a mandated reporter. But there's the visual things. The other part is the hearing, right? You're listening. You're listening to people talk in your classroom or in your living room or on the coaching field or playing field or whatever, right? You're listening. Well, if they're not there, you can't listen. And so that's another way to look at it. If they're, usually pretty good at coming to school all the time, and then all of a sudden they're not, well, that's probably, could be a bullying issue. So I would talk to them. Hey, your grades have been great. Your attendance has been even better than that. I've noticed you've missed a few times. Let's talk about that. And remember, going back to the Krista part of this, way back in the day as an AmeriCorps member, you're not going to get that out of them right off the jump. Nobody wants to say, oh, I've been getting, bullied on my way to school when I walk every day. Nobody wants to say that. So, but we used to tell them, we would say, okay, well, can you walk with others? Can you walk a different route? Can you, right? So you're trying to figure out all these different things. And the last thing I want to say is, which this was a term back in probably the 80s and 90s. I don't know how much they use it now. But what GMA said was very important. The people that were the most scary weren't the people that would go and lash out and do all that kind of stuff, typically, right? It was the person that would suppress all these feelings, and then it was the one straw that broke the camel's back. And back in the 80s and 90s, they called it going postal, right? Because there was, like saying that there were workers that would just take it from the public, and then they just would explode. And their explosion wouldn't be, curse words or yelling or whatever. It would get super physical, right? And so I think that we'd have to be aware that it's not the person that's lashing out all the time that we need to be afraid of. It's the person that's suppressing, and they don't know how to deal with that and they'll flee. Like GMA said, they'll flee, but eventually the straw breaks every camel's back.
For sure. Thank you. So, Robert, is there another question?
Yes, the next question is, how can I teach youth to stand up for themselves effectively?
There's a large continuum of things that you can do. And some people will feel more comfortable doing certain things than others will. So, for instance, sometimes we say to kids, walk away. But for some kids, walking away is the absolute worst thing they can do because it interferes with who they are. It's not about what they're doing, it's about who they are. Whereas other kids, to really have to stand up is very difficult. So there is a book that you can all tune into that is that was written by Gretchen Rubin, and it identifies the different ways that people deal with expectations. And I think we have expectations about kids. If you're being bullied, how are you going to do that? Well, what she discovered, and it's called the four tendencies. And she says we're hardwired to be one of these. And I don't know that you have to buy that hook, line, and sinker, but you do need to understand that there are different ways of being in the world. And so when we're working with kids, we want to take that into consideration. So one of the most prominent types of people, the way we interact, is as an obliger. And an obliger will just go along to get along. If somebody else is involved, they will put themselves on the sideline and they will do what the other person wants them to do. And so that could be true of the bully, that could be true of the victim, and that could be true of the onlookers. And when Brett was talking about going postal, an obliger will take it for a very long time. But when they're done, they're done. And it can be quite explosive. But that's about 41 to 42% of the world. And you know, we like people who are obliging because they like to get along and we don't have to worry about that. But there's something deeper in them in that they will do for others and not necessarily do for themselves. The second type of person is a questioner. And so you may have kids who are questioning everything. Why is this bully doing this to me? Why should I stand up if I'm the onlooker? I'm not doing anything. What's important for me to do? Well, why should I tolerate anybody not doing exactly what I say? I have to do what other people tell me to do, so I'm going to just pass it along. That would be from a bully standpoint. So they're questioners and they're wondering, what's going on here? How does this affect me? Why can I not do this, but I can do that? And that's really about 22% of the world. And then she identified a third type, and that group is an upholder. And an upholder will follow the rules. Once they've internalized the rules, they just follow them. And they will follow them for themselves and they will follow them for others. Now, if you can get the onlookers to that point so that they can understand that what they do and what they say really makes a difference, and that that's part of a social contract, they will follow that. They will do that. Not because you told them to, but because they believe that that's what's right to do. And that's about 18% of the world. And then the last part, which is a little less than 20 as well, are kids who are just rebellious. And those are the most difficult to work with because they're not going to meet expectations for them. So if I'm getting bullied and I'm also a rebel, it's going to be harder to help me move along and figure out ways to deal with bullying. If I'm the onlooker, it's going to be harder to get me to buy into something to do because I'm not going to be likely to do that. And as the bully, if I'm that type and I am kind of rebellious, I don't know why I should have to stop. I like doing it. I feel good when I do it. I'm winning. I'm intimidating, and I'm fine with that. So it's just really looking at who they are as people and then helping them find a path that works for them. Not the path you would choose for you unless you happen to be in sync with them. But by and large, it's helping kids find a path that will work for them. So that was a long-winded answer. So Brett, I'm sure you have more to add to that.
Yeah, just a quick question on that. I remember reading the book a long time ago. Actually, I listened with my coach here, but I listened to the book on tape. I can't remember. Did she say anything about people that are? I mean, I realize you're probably naturally bent one way or another, but that there's people that are kind of all of those things. Did she mention that? I can't remember.
No, she didn't. She said that you're hardwired for one. So if you're under pressure, you'll go with your style. However, that being said, nobody's probably a purist, right? Everybody can they can be situational, and I think she would agree with that. But she says if push comes to shove, you'll tend to deal with expectations in one of those key ways.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Yeah. So I want to start with the hard wiring, which is what you had mentioned and she had talked about. So obviously I don't remember this, but my mom, Gma, the doctor herself, she said that when I was about 2 years old, that, you know, a real safe neighborhood and all that stuff. So it wasn't like nowadays. And so I was out across the street at a neighbor's, and she said she was looking out to see what was going on. And like the cartoon back in the day, where they would grab the kid by his forehead and he would swing. And so she said, I don't know what happened, but I was just hardwired that I was going to hit this kid. But this kid was like 5, 6, 7 years older than me. And so I didn't know what I was doing. I'm 2 years old, right? I'm in my diaper, for goodness sake. But he's holding my head like the cartoon. And she said, and then I hit him and I walked away. And so there was a sense hardwired in me about fairness and equality and justice, even from the time I was very, very small. So when we talk about hardwired, it's not like we can't learn to do things differently, but the reality is we are hardwired in a certain way. And I remember when I listened to her book, I thought, oh, that's helpful to be able to, you know, put people in different categories because it would help you to understand how you might deal with them. And I know we do a lot of that with testing in our leadership courses, where we'll put them in four corners and all that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
Second of all, I would say, look, we all need to be assertive, but that doesn't mean we have to be aggressive. That's not a play on words. That's not a wordsmithing. That's factual, right? Because I think a lot of times we think that it can be an either or situation. And I think that a lot of times we need to be assertive. I remember when my wife of now, I think we've been together, married, and dating 43 years now, when the telemarketers back in the day would run over the top of her. And I was like, honey, you don't need to allow that to happen. Why don't, she was taught to be nice. So the first time I heard her stand up to a telemarketer, I was like, you go, girl. Because she was very assertive and nice and pleasing, just like she would be. But she was, she gave the Dikembe Natumbo waggle that said, no, you're not gonna push me around. So I think there's assertiveness and aggressiveness, and I think sometimes in tougher situations we have to be assertive. And then as a skill, what we used to teach the kids is broken record. I understand that you're mad, but that's not going to change, dot, dot, dot. I understand that you're upset, but that's not going to change, dot, dot, dot. I understand that, right? And so we know that with parents or even with bullies, if you'll say that broken record, usually even the bully will stop after three.
For sure. Right. All right. So, Robert, another question.
Yes, the next question is, what role does empathy play in preventing bullying?
Hey, and Gma, before you go there, I wanted to add one more thing. I just that came into my head about the last question.
Sure.
Practice, role play, role model, practice with your kids over and over because it took a lot of our caseload youth around probably 3 to 5 months to start being able to learn how to be assertive versus the fleeing or the freezing or different things of that nature. Sorry, but I want to throw that in there. Practice.
I think that that's so true. What is it that Malcolm Gladwell says? You need 10,000 hours worth of practice before you're any good at anything. And maybe it's not quite 10,000 hours, but we need lots and lots of practice. So, the question of empathy is the ability to do two things. It's the ability to stand and understand what's going on inside the other person. It's feeling it and understanding the impact of that. But the second part is that you're not trying to fix them. You don't have an agenda. I'm not going to try and step into your shoes so I can fix you. I'm going to try and step into your shoes so I can understand you. I can be a sounding board for you. I can listen. And what if I listen and I listen well and I provide you with feedback or even just repeating what you've said in a different way, I am going to be helpful in helping you find your own solution rather than trying to convince you of my solution. So when I think about empathy, I think about several things. So there's one of the things that happens with kids is what you would call in group. And if you're in the in group, then you're okay. And everybody not in the in group is ostracized. Well, that's a form of bullying. It may not look like physical intimidation, but it's a form of bullying. So if you're not in my group, you are somehow less than. You don't matter as much as the people in my group because we're special. And empathy, if that's developed in kids, would not allow that because you would realize that every person is part of the in group. They may not participate in the same way that you do, and that's okay with you. You understand who they are. You're not trying to persuade them to be different. You're accepting of them and their situation as it is, and you embrace them and you're there for them without trying to fix them. So I think empathy matters a lot. And I think that empathy is really part of what needs to happen for the onlookers. Because if you're onlooking and you don't take to heart what's going on and not just look at what the victim's feeling, what's the bully feeling? Why is the bully acting the way they are? What's going on with them is part of it just as much as trying to figure out and have empathy for the victim. Not that you approve of the bullying, but understanding it and having empathy and understanding, even though you disagree with the behavior, is perfectly legitimate. So, Brett, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I lost you for about 15 seconds. My whole screen went out, but
I know.
so hopefully I don't repeat something you already said. I just think that, back in the day, 20 plus years ago, we really didn't use that word empathy, but we were using it in the bully triangle, and we used it with the bully more than anyone else because what we kind of found out is there were reasons why somebody was bullying. And so what we always say is we wanted to go to the root of the problem. If you think about a weed in your front yard, your grass, or in your flower bed or whatever, we chop off the weed, it's back the next day, right? Chop off the weed, it's back. So we said, how can we get to the root of the problem? And so as we were talking to these bullies, we would figure out that a lot of times they were mirroring the behaviors of their dad or their mom or whatever the case may be. Whether that was physical bullying, mental, emotional bullying, it was all of that. And so what we would do is then we would figure out what the root of the problem was. And then we would say, okay, now how did you feel? Now put yourself in the same position of the person you're bullying. Whoa, that hit home with them. You mean that's how they feel when I bully them? Yeah, that's how they feel. And they couldn't make that connection, especially the younger they were, or even if they were older, because they just were trying to figure out how do I get this out of me? Because the rage and the upsetness, so to speak, was just so much there. And remember, 25, 30 years ago, we didn't have all the different ways to be able to have these coping skills, right? So we did what the best we could with what we had. And a lot of times we didn't know what the heck all empathy. We're like, I don't even know what that means, so to speak. But that's what we did primarily with the bullies themselves, and that really helped. But we did it with all of them, even the onlookers, right? And how are you feeling if you're the victim? Well, I'm feeling helpless. Well, talk to me about a time when you were feeling helpless. What did you do? How did you right? And so we would just kind of work that through and role play it and practice, practice, practice.
Absolutely. I think that it's important to help kids learn to speak their truth, right? And speaking truth is not always easy. A lot of times we hedge and we don't speak truth. And so giving kids an opportunity creating an environment where kids can speak truth is incredibly important. And as an expanded learning professional, you have the opportunity to do exactly that. And you do that by becoming a listener, an active listener, not trying to fix them, just listening and then asking questions so that they can figure out how to help themselves. So, Robert, how about another question?
Next question is, how can I involve? Oh no, sorry. What are effective strategies for addressing cyberbullying?
Don't get on the internet. I mean, obviously that's helpful. I think that first of all, there are lots of things that happen in cyberbullying because it's safe. I can be nasty, I can say ugly things, and you can't do anything to me. I can just do that. I can do it anonymously, I can do it with my name, but I can be the ugliest part of me, and I don't have to do it face to face. And I think sometimes when we look at cyberbullying, if they had to be face to face in the same room, they might not do it at all, right? Because some of it's really gutsy, the things they say. So how do you combat that, right? So of course, when I jokingly said, but in some ways I mean that, don't go on. Don't put yourself in a position to be cyberbullied. And yet that obviously is unrealistic. But it certainly isn't unrealistic for younger children. Younger kids don't need to be doing social media and all of those things. Or also be watchful of the things that they're viewing or the games that they're playing. Uh, if they have opportunity to have screen time, because there are things which will promote the attitude of bullying. I'm going to get you to do what I want you to do. And once you have that in your mindset, then you're going to start figuring out how to get people to do what you want them to do, how to manipulate them, how to puppet them. So I think that that's part of it. Then the second thing I think that we need to do is have a lot more opportunities for kids to give themselves affirmations so that they are not so when somebody says something bad, they don't immediately fall apart, because what they know is that they're okay. I was observing in a program 2 weeks ago, I think, and in order to come into the classroom, the child had to give an affirmation for themselves. They had to say something good about themselves. And I may have shared this already, but it was just precious. This little girl said, "I am kind, I work hard, and I'm cute." And I thought, yes, you are, right? But giving yourself affirmations and believing in yourself is really helpful, because then when some unknown other, which is what a cyberbully usually is, you might know them, but it's somebody who doesn't want to risk it in the school grounds or something. But when you realize that really they don't get to determine who you are. You get to determine that. And so helping kids create those affirmations for themselves so that they can believe in themselves, I think is really important. And then the other thing is to help them understand how media works and to understand algorithms, which you may feel like is way beyond kids. But I think we can explain that in such a way that says, based on your viewing history, there are going to be people who connect with you, and maybe they're connecting with you because you are really nice and they'd like to just burst that bubble. So I think that I think we have to talk about it. I think we have to explore it. And I think we have to realize that for kids, if they are suffering from their own self-concept, will fall very much victim and prey to that. And so we want to build self-confidence. So a youth development approach that says, you know what, I'm capable. I am who I am, and I am okay. I am enough, and I am capable.
Yeah, I any kind of bullying or any kind of stuff where people try to get away with things that they wouldn't do if somebody was there. I call it the Albertsons syndrome, which is a grocery store, and then a highway or freeway, right? And
Mhm.
so I'm a decent sized guy. I'm pretty athletic. I got a scowl on my face most of the time. And so when somebody cuts me off on the freeway or the highway, I'm like, dude, if we were at Albertsons and we were in the grocery line, I guarantee you ain't going to act like a fool. You're not going to turn on your blinker and just cut in front of me, right? You're not going to do that. So I think what you said there is very critically important. It's easy to be all that in a bag of rocks, as my Gma would say, even though it's a bag of chips. It's easy to be all that when you're hiding behind a screen or hiding behind a 2,000-pound car at 50 miles per hour or hiding behind whatever the case may be. So what I say is, be aware of that. Albertsons versus a freeway. We'll call it the I-5 or 99 where we're at. The other thing is that, you cannot go on. It's true. I mean, that's going to be tough, but you can block them, right? You can block bullies, and you don't, whatever your feed is, you don't have to put up with that stuff. I know I listen to a lot of videos on YouTube all day long when I'm working and doing my different things with business and whatnot. And I hear say all the time, they'll say something like, "Yeah, I blocked you because you're being a punk," right? So we don't have to take that. So I think blocking is okay. Also, you can only read the positive comments, right? So like I get on the scales in the morning, and if I feel like it's going up and up and up and up before it actually stops on a certain weight, I jump off, right? So if you're reading through and somebody's like, "Oh, you're stupid," I get the stoop, I'm off, right? I don't need to hear them calling me stupid or whatever the case may be. So I just think that in the end, take a look at all of these types of different things. You don't have to get on. When you read the comments, only read the positive ones. If you get to a negative one, go next. Know that people are hateful because, when you're invisible, so to speak, everybody can be tough and rough and gruff and mean and all that. And none of that's okay. And it's
You
not a
know,
reflection of who you are.
right. Do you remember how we used to have people collect what we called the warm fuzzies? Right. So when somebody tells you something good, writes you a note, gives you a praise, any of those things, you need to collect them. And so what you were saying is, that's a way if something is said that hurts your feelings, go read your warm fuzzies because they will set you straight on who you are and how you've affected others. So, Robert, you're up. And do we have, talk to me about the audience that we have today? I mean, maybe nobody because it's tax day, could be depressing for everybody. But just curious who's there and do they have any questions?
Yes, right now we have 3 viewers on YouTube and we have 5 on TikTok.
Okay, cool. So, and we have access, we could have access to their information. And if you do provide us with a way to get in contact with you via email, we will be happy to send you some information on the bully triangle so that you can have a little more information around that so that you can understand the role that each corner of that triangle plays. So if you'd like that, please give us your email and we promise not to bombard you with everything. We'll send you things from time to time, but we will send you the information about the bully triangle. So now, Robert, is there another question?
Awesome. Yes, the next question is how can I involve parents in bullying prevention efforts?
I think that involving parents can be tricky. And so I think that it's tricky for several reasons. One, number one is that the parent themselves may be a bully. And that may be the exact role model that the child's learned how to do it from. So they will say things that will indicate that to you. One of my favorite comments from kids, but I've also heard it from parents when I would talk with them when I was a principal. So a child hits somebody. Hitting is hitting. But the child would say, no, no, this is different because I was hitting them back. And my point was, no, hitting is hitting, no matter if you were the first or the second person. But when you talked with their parent would say, well, it's okay that they hit because they were hitting back, not being the original perpetrator of it. So I think that if the parent tends to have bullying characteristics themselves, that they have learned how to intimidate to get what they want, then it will be more difficult for them to not be saying, good job, child. You're doing what you need to do to get your way. So I think that you want to know that. The second thing that I think you want to do with parents is to be sure that you are not talking in terms of every individual symptom of bullying. So for instance, one of the things about bullying is that it puts you in an unsafe situation. So for some parents, excuse me, they may not care about bullying, but they do care about safety. So that would be how you would form that, because your child is doing things that are unsafe for themselves and for others. Some parents will care a great deal about respect, and they really do not want their child to be disrespectful of someone else. So if you talk about bullying with that parent in terms of respect, you're probably going to get a lot further than if you're talking about it in some other terms. A third thing that parents often care about is their child being responsible? Is their child making good decisions? And so with that parent, you would want to have that conversation about how the bullying behavior or the onlooker behavior or the victim behavior, because you're going to want to talk with them about, no matter which piece their child is demonstrating, talk to them in terms of that, because the symptom is the bullying, but the underlying root cause may be that they don't understand about being respectful, or they don't feel respected themselves, so they don't feel the need to respect others, or maybe a safety. It doesn't seem to them that that's an issue. So I think that to engage parents, you want to be sure that it's across the board, because all three of those behaviors need to be addressed, but also to find the key to that parent, especially if you find that they can be pretty overpowering or dominant themselves. I know that I was talking with the site coordinator just last week who wanted to give the child a compliment for the way that they had handled an adverse situation, and the parent just didn't want to hear any of it. You won't need to deal with him much longer. He's going to be out of here in sixth grade, and my kid can do whatever they want. So sometimes the parent's just not willing to listen. But I do believe that you can approach parents and say something to the effect of, I know how much you care about respectfulness, and so do I, but I'm not sure your child sees it in the same way. And then you can talk about the behaviors that you see, but putting it in a bigger context. So, Brett, what do you have?
Well, I think it starts with day one before you ever even talk about any of that kind of stuff. So, and I think I learned this from you. I mean, this was 30 years ago or more when I was teaching. I had 16 special day kids. And so I called the parents within the first 2 weeks. And the first thing they would say to me, "What did my kid do?" And I would tell them something positive. And they were like, but what did he do? And I'm like, well, I just told you what he did. He did this great thing. And I, say dot, dot, dot. And they're like, well, no, but what did he do wrong? I'm like, I don't know. Right. And so, anyway, so it would open up the parents, because you have to remember, typically with special day parents, at least back in the day, they're getting called 10, 2, and 4 about everything that's negative and wrong, obviously, because every parent that I called said the exact same thing. Well, what did they do wrong? I'm like, I don't know what they did wrong. So that opened it up. And then number two, throughout the year, like when we would have our annual review, I would go sit with them, right? Because it was very intimidating. It would go suit, 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 power suit, 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 meaning superintendent, assistant superintendent, psychologist, counselor, all these people. And so the first meeting, I'm sitting there, I'm going, man, I wonder how they feel on the other side. Just like people had taught me back in the day. I'm a caption looker. I want to look at what the other person, I'm like, well, I don't know. I better go over there and take a look. So I went and sat with the parent. I would look, I was like, well, of course it's intimidating. So right off the bat, that would happen. And then I would continue to communicate with them. So then if I needed to say something difficult to the parent about their child, whether it was the victim child, whether it was an onlooker or the bully, they were very well open for that, because I had built a relationship. And we've talked about that through time, care, and belief, right? And so I was constantly on a weekly basis communicating with them, whether it was a memo, whether it was a phone call, whether it was a note home to their kid, whether it was whatever. So I think that, that's a big deal. I think the next thing is that, like a parent workshop or a skit. So we would do skits about the bully triangle. would talk about that with the parents. Well, yeah, that's no okay. Well, now that you know that this wasn't so cool and this was great, the way they handled this, now let's take that to the real life. And then we would have them talk amongst the family, and then it would be, and I remember times where it would come out where big old mean kind of bully man, 6'5", 280 pounds would come up and be like, dude, I didn't know I was like that. And I said, well, bro, first of all, you're 6'5", 280. So you're already physically intimidating. So, and then if you have a loud voice, like I have a loud voice on top of that, that's not going to help your cause. And then I got a scowl on my face. That doesn't help my cause. So there's ways to do that. So I learned to smile sometimes and do different things. And so it would be a great opener, a skit to get them, kind of going and whatnot. And then we would just provide feedback. And we were okay with, likes, dislikes, undecideds, or we would do reflections, right? Where we would say, hey, what was your key learn, or what was a confirmation, a tweak, or an aha today? So I just think it's about communicating with them. But I would start with building relationships, and the way to do that, say something nice about their kids, or say something nice to the kids as well. We always said at least 2 months, nothing but praise, because the reprimands will come.
For sure, for sure. All right, Robert, moving forward.
Yes, next question is, how do I support a youth who has been bullied?
Well, first of all, being bullied does not feel good, right? I mean, you feel less than, you wonder why, right? All of those things go through your mind. And I think it's really important to validate those for kids, to help them realize that yes, I would be feeling that way in your situation as well. I think to validate those feelings is important before you try and get them to change or to take action. So what you're feeling is valid, and now let's talk about what you want to do with that. How do you want to move forward? So this is valid, those feelings, but let's take them up now and put those feelings into our head and come up with plans or things that we can do, because you have to feel what you have to feel what you feel. You can't stop feeling that. And when Brett was speaking earlier about tamping that down, right? That's what happens, and then you implode, right? Or you could explode, but you can implode on yourself and cause harm to yourself because you have embraced this notion that you're not okay, or you can explode to try and get it to go away. So I think that it's just really important that we help kids understand that the feelings you're feeling are valid. This feeling of fight, flight, or freeze, that is chemical that happens in your body. Now you got to figure out what you're going to do with that. And so I think that one of the things you can talk to kids about is preventing the situation, preventing being, so as Brett mentioned earlier, well, walk to school in a group rather than walking by yourself, right? I mean, so strategies so that you can prevent the situation that you're in or that has caused you to be bullied. And then I think it's also, if you can't prevent, then let's intervene and let's do it quickly. And I can remember having a young girl come to me and say, oh, she was so upset, she was being bullied, and she wanted me to go and talk with the boy that was bullying her. And what I realized is that if I did that and I became part of this mix where it comes to me and then back out, that I wasn't helping her one iota. Even if I got him to stop, it wasn't helpful to her because she hadn't learned how to stand up for herself. So we role played. We did a lot of that practice. And then I told her, I'll go with you while you tell him what's going on with you. And it was amazing because he thought what he was doing was letting her know that he liked her, right? He didn't know how to express. He said, but I like you, right? And he kept saying that, but I like you. And she kept saying, well, that may be, but that's not how I feel, right? I don't feel like you like me. And he was amazed. He said, I just thought, it was okay. I thought she liked it. I thought, right? And so it was just really, he was devastated as she was, but for totally different reasons. But it would not have happened had I told him for her. It wasn't hearing it from me that would have helped him. It would have been, he would have just blown that off. But when she told him, and she had tears in her eyes, and she said, "This is how I feel," he was blown away. And therefore, he was able to stop the behavior. And they got along after that. So I just think that we have to empower kids to handle it. And yet we don't do that by just saying, "Go handle it," and we're done. We have to work through that with them so that they are 100% ready to handle it and to take care of that. So, Brett, I'm going to kick it to you.
Yeah, right. I mean, that's the key word: empower versus enable, right? Because that's what we do is we don't empower a lot of the times, and then we enable because we go fix it for them. We're gonna fix it for them, and I don't remember if it was you or somebody else who told me, but I think it was you. Back in the day, they had the Siamese twins, and you had said, "Look, if you plan on joining at the hip with them, and you're gonna be with them all over all the time, then go ahead and direct and tell and go ahead and do it for them and enable them, go and do all those things." But the reality is you're not going to be with them. And so, I remember even with my own kids, we would talk about, drinking and driving and different things, just like you did with us. And you said, "Look, God's not going to appreciate it. I'm not going to appreciate it. It's against the law. It's no good and rotten and all that. But I'm not going to tell you what to do. But I will tell you that if you think that you need to go out and drink, then you can call me at any time. I'm not going to look with any blame or any judgment or any of those types of things." So I think empower versus enable. The other one you said was validation. Validate what they're thinking or feeling, right? Some people are feeling type people, right? And you can understand that by their language. They'll say, "I feel like." Other people are more thinky type people, and they'll say, "Well, I think," and you'll hear them say, "I think" a lot versus "I feel." Whatever the case may be, validate whatever it is that they're thinking, feeling, whatever, right? Because remember, their perception is their reality, even if that perception isn't real. It's possible to have a perception that's not real, but guess what? It's real to them for sure. The other thing is this: you don't need to feel bad if you're a mandated reporter or something like that. You don't have to feel bad if you don't know everything. If you don't know how to deal with the bully situation, they have counselors and psychologists. Seek a professional. One of my good buddies at the middle school, whose name was Aaron, he was a counselor and he was great. And they're trained in ways that we're not trained. So we may have, let's say 4 arrows in the quiver, so to speak, and he may have 7, 8, 9, 10, he or she, right? And they may be able to get through get through to them or get to them in ways that we can't. So always seek a professional. If you don't, not up the jump, but if you've tried 2, 3, 4 things, it's not working, seek a professional and see if they might be able to help you.
Absolutely. I missed part of that because I blinked out. Not quite sure why either. Maybe we're just having internet issues
It was
today.
my best stuff ever over the
I
last
know.
15
I
weeks.
know. I apologize. I missed your best stuff. So, Robert, next question.
Yes. How can I address subtitle forms of bullying like exclusions?
Exclusions happen for a variety of reasons. One reason an exclusion will happen, and I think it's less likely to, I think it's less this way today, but in the past, boys might be physically bullying, but girls would be socially bullying and exclusion. And I think now that maybe the girls can also bully physically and boys can also bully in a social way. But exclusion says, again, you're not in my group, we're the in group, and you're not enough, you're not okay, and so you're on the outside. So that is one kind of exclusion. Another kind of exclusion is the child excluding themselves because they are trying to prevent being bullied. So that's also possible. But I think that what we really want to practice is something that's not brand new. It's been around for a while, but it's restorative practices. So when you bully If you're the bully, you are harmful to the person you're bullying. You're causing them harm. And you may also be causing harm to the onlookers. And I'm pretty sure you're causing harm to yourself, but that's a different issue. But if you are being a bully and you are causing harm to another person by excluding them or minimalizing them or making them feel less than, then one of the things that needs to happen is we need to practice restorative circles. So and this would work if a child excluded themselves or a child was excluded from the group. How do you get them back in the group? Did the group exclude them because they were doing things that they didn't like, because they were not being part of the group, they weren't collaborating, or did they exclude them because they are trying to bully them? But what we have to do are these restorative practices, and we have to repair the harm. And when we use restorative practices, it's a conversation, and we have to listen. We have to listen to both sides. A lot of times we think, well, we'll just listen to the victim. No, we need to listen in a triangle. We need to listen to the victim. We need to listen to the bully, and we need to listen to the onlookers, because otherwise we're going to have a very narrow perspective of what's going on. And so what we want to do is get that broader perspective, and we want to take a look at that. And then we want to practice restorative practices. And it's part of restorative justice, but you can find it there. But there are certain very clear restorative practices. But what they do is they listen to all the sides, both sides, three sides, however many sides there are. They listen, they try and find common ground. They talk about the harm or damage that was done and what needs to be done to repair that, so that the person can rejoin the group and become part of the group again. So I would say that that's an important part of helping kids get back to the business of being collaborative, of being part of a small group, of having that sense of belonging. I belong here. And we do that by understanding that there are times, I don't know about you that are listening, but there are times I'm on the outs with other people. And they're normally my friends, and we normally get along. And for whatever the reason, I'm on the outs with them. And I have to figure out how to get back in. And then I also have to, if I've done something harmful in the process, to be able to try and correct that. So Brett, do you have some thoughts?
Yeah, I completely went out for like a minute and a half. I had to go back to the email where the live stream link was sent. So I have no idea what you said. I don't even know if I actually remember the question, but I think I did. So I'm going to go at this from a sports perspective. So, usually you pick teams, right? And so obviously if, Joe Jock was the captain every single time, they're always going to pick the best players, and that means the players that weren't the best would be excluded, right? And so what I would do is I would put up, let's say, the two kids that maybe were more Molly Math than Polly PE, right? And so we would let them pick. But sometimes that was too much for them. So what we would do is we would get it down to where it was the last four, and they would get to choose, right, to be able to do that. Other times what we would do is we would intentionally, but we would have an adult right there with them. We would intentionally pair the bully and the victim together, right? Or sometimes we would on purpose, we would pair the bully and a bunch of onlookers together, right? So maybe other groups it was just 1v1, and then with them we would put 7 or 10 people with them, because that can be, to where it's like, wow, wait a minute, what am I doing here? And they're not going to bully 10 or 12 people that they're not used to being bullied. So I think that there's a lot of things that we can do as the child champions in the setup phase to make sure that the kids are not excluded. Plus, which I always say, in my classroom, or whether I was coaching or whatever, we just didn't play that. I go back to what my wife always says with the Kimbe to Tumble, with that little finger wag, that says, no, we don't do that. We don't exclude anybody for any reason. I don't care if it's race, color, ethnicity, tall, big, little, skinny, no teeth, whatever. We don't play that around here. We're all human beings. We're all doing the best that we can. And if we're not, we should be. And we're here to help you to be the best version of yourself, regardless.
Absolutely. All right, Robert, I think we have time for one last question.
Yes, last question is how can I encourage youth to build positive peer relationships?
You know, peer relationships are challenging, especially at certain ages. Like you can be my best friend today, and tomorrow you're my enemy, right? And so that happens a lot, and we need to understand that kids don't really understand what it means to be a best friend, what it really means to even be a friend, right? A friend is someone you can count on. A friend is someone you can rely on. A friend is someone who will be there for you, even if they're upset with you themselves. So I think that we can spend a lot of time working with kids on what does it mean to be a friend, right? A friend is someone who is there for you, and sometimes we find that people just aren't able to do that for other people, and that's okay. But we also need to know that friendship is transient. We had an opportunity to have high school students come down and talk to middle school students. And one of the questions that middle school students asked was about being bullied on campus. And the response was very interesting because these were juniors and seniors who had understood how it worked. And they said, the people that you pick as friends in high school may not be the people that you were friends with in middle school. And the friends that you pick for your freshman and sophomore year may not be the friends that you pick for your junior and senior year, because what you discover as you get to know them better, as they have more opportunities to become themselves, that you don't really have anything in common with them. But they said, so what you need to do is be prepared to say, okay, we can still be acquaintances. We can still wish each other well, but we're really not going to be friends that hang out with each other all the time. And to do that, and that's okay. And I was talking to a person absolutely yesterday, actually, and their daughter is in college, and she's out of state. She's no longer in California, and they mentioned that she had roommates, and it went really well for 3 months. They were all great buddies, and then for whatever the reason, things changed. And so she had to find a new group of friends that were more to her liking, that liked the same things that she did. So I think it's important to know that friends can change, but by and large, most people have one or two lifetime friends. But it's not the 20 that you had along the way. So I think helping kids understand what being a friend means is important, and then letting them know that it's okay if you change that you change that up and find somebody else that is more suitable for what you like to do. So Brett, I'm going to let you finish this out.
Yeah, you gave me all 30 seconds like you
I
normally
know. So sorry.
No, no. I would just say that we used to, I did back in the day with my special day kids. We would do peer matchups, right? So we would get Joe Jock and we would hook them up with one of my Down syndrome kids, or we would get, Polly, whatever, the cheerleader of all, whatever, and we'll call her Cheryl, the cheerleader, right? And we would hook them up with somebody else. And what it would do is it would bring that mentality up, because what happens is, if you think about it, especially in middle school, everybody's so awkward, right? I mean, I was like 4'11" and weighed 3 pounds. It's awkward. I wanted to be this great athlete, right? I'm going up against somebody who's 5'9" and weighs 180 pounds. Probably not going to go well for me. So I think that as you're partnering up and doing that. Also, last thing I'll say is what you were talking about. I call them proximity friends. We all have those where, one of my PE teachers that I was with every day, all the time, we never talked. Now, there was another one that we still talk 25 years later. So I think whether you're a sophomore and all those things you were saying, I think proximity friends, that's just the way it is. You're going to work at certain places for a year or whatever, and then you're going to go bye-bye, and that's okay. There's not that many lifelong friendships, so I'd hang on to them the best you can.
Yes. Okay. So thank you, everybody who came to the podcast. Remember to give us your email if you'd like information sent to you on the bullying triangle. And we look forward to